Welcome, everyone. Today we have with us Michela. For those of you who don't know, I asked beforehand, she's Italian, so we're going to say Michela. I imagine a lot of people call you Michela.
hmm
Have you just gotten used to it?
Yeah, it's funny. There was this one time where I had like a piano something, and this like piano critiquer asked me if my name was Michela, and I was like, "No, it's Michaela." And then later I was like, "Wait, that was my name." Because in America, I'm so used to Michaela, but in Italy,
Yeah.
it's Michela.
Michela, yeah. I love that. So Michela is a licensed clinical social worker, trauma-informed therapist, and spiritual coach who helps millennial and Gen Z women rebuild a meaningful spirituality after leaving Christianity. Michela combines her experience in trauma and internal family systems therapy with her own transformative experience, which I can't wait to hear about, to guide others in healing from religious trauma, navigating family dynamics, and discovering authentic spirituality beyond traditional doctrines. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So, like I said, super curious. Can you tell us a little bit about what made you, maybe it was your own personal experience, like what led you to become a trauma therapist and spiritual coach aimed to help people with what we just described?
Yeah. Well, the therapist route began first. Um, Actually, when I left religion, I left spirituality entirely, and I wanted to still create meaning in my life and help people. I knew those were still strong desires that I had, and so I went the social work route and eventually got my license in clinical social work and became a trauma informed therapist because I just really wanted to help people who are hurting, and I am informed of even like complex PTSD, and I just know that trauma is just a factor in so many different avenues of struggles, and so I wanted to be informed and trained in that avenue. Over time, I learned about internal family systems therapy, which interestingly enough actually contributed to my reconnection with spirituality.
Hmm.
And then given that, and just some opportunities coming my way, and just learning more about the possibility of being able to help more people through coaching, be able to just take this avenue of providing support in this area of spirituality. I felt very called to it, as a therapist and even just in social work. You're always asked, what's your primary population that you want to work with? What's the population you're most passionate about and, that you want to focus on? And I could never choose one because it all sounded interesting to me. I wanted to help everyone. I wanted to help anyone. I could never choose, like, this is a population of people I really want to work with. But around the time I was considering building a coaching business, and I experienced my spiritual awakening outside of religion, it just felt so clear, and I felt like absolutely, yeah, this is the population that I want to work with, and so that was a first for me. And then the coaching business began.
That makes a lot of sense. Is it okay to ask more specifically about your experience with religion and leaving religion and your spiritual awakening and how all that happened?
Yeah, absolutely. Would you like me to just kind of start?
Start us wherever it started. Tell us a little bit about maybe what was going on and what made you want to leave, if that's okay to share.
Yeah, so, it's interesting. There are all kinds of experiences people have with religion. I grew up in a family that went to church every Sunday. When I was 8, we moved to Italy for my dad to become the pastor of his hometown there in Sicily. And, this was after he had gone to Bible school, which is where he met my mom in Florence. And he had always wanted to go back to kind of give back, kind of what he had learned. And so for a couple of years, I was like a pastor's kid, and we would do like mission work, trying to bring more people to the church. And things got more religious during that time. I mean, he was working as a pastor, so he was studying things to present to the church, and he did some other work too. But that kind of started another level of religion for my family. When we moved back to the States, we began not going only every Sunday, but every Wednesday to church. And I was very active in the youth group and all the mission trips and all that stuff. And my dad's research into religion and what's the best way to, honor God just deepened more and more. With the transition of moving from Italy to America during the school year, we had started homeschooling that year. And my mom decided she liked it better. And so we then were also homeschooled. And in my area of Houston, I know it's in a lot of places too, there's a lot of, Christian homeschoolers and co-ops and different things that can allow you to still be part of like some kind of community and meet other kids, but everyone kind of with the same worldview. And there was even a course that I did that's a 4-year course called The Great Conversation that focused a lot on basically learning everything outside of math and science from a biblical worldview. So they would teach you all the classic literature and writing skills, and it would also be Bible and apologetics, which is how to defend your faith. There would be all of that, all from the point of like the Bible is the word of God and totally true. And this is how you can interpret this literature from that viewpoint and all that kind of stuff. And, my faith really became my own when I was, so sorry,
That's
trying to
okay.
get that over with.
Take your time.
When I was around 11, my faith became my own. And so I loved that class, for the years that I was in it and strong in my faith. I was just a very spiritual person in general. I mean, my highest values were my spirituality, my religion. I wanted to be a missionary. I wanted to, be like a pastor's wife because in, my sect of Christianity, like the woman couldn't really have that leadership role. And so I wanted to be like as close as I could and
Mhm.
marry one with the power. Not to have
Mhm.
the power, but to have the influence. That's what I really wanted, is to have the
Mhm.
influence, to make a difference and to impact people. So
Mhm.
those were like my big desires. And what happened for me is that when I was 16, I came out of my room after, it was like a Saturday. And at this point, again, within my dad's research, we were just always digging deeper into what does God really want from us. And, when you take the Bible very literally and you're studying it all the time, all these other people who are studying it, you can come to some more drastic conclusions. And at this point, we were practicing Messianic Jews. So basically, following Jewish law and the Old Testament law to a large degree while believing that Jesus was the Messiah. And so it was Sabbath, and I decided for myself on the Sabbath I would only do Christian related things or God related things. So if I was reading, it was something along those lines, or listening to music, it was that. And I would fast and pray and those sorts of things. And I decided to come out of my room and I sit in the living room, and my dad's Italian. He was a preacher for a time. Like, he's definitely a talker. So it was nothing new that he was like basically giving a sermon to my mom in the middle of the living room. And
Yep.
so I just sat down and just kind of like see what he was talking about. And it was such a shock to me that I literally thought something happened with my ears, but I heard him say something along the lines of basically that, God's not real, religion is manipulation, and, we're ridiculous if we continue to follow religion. And it was such a huge shock to me after, my whole upbringing. And it didn't really phase me too much in the sense of like my own faith. Like, I was still very strong and confident in my own faith. But, we lived together. And again, he's this, very talkative person. So over time, we would have many conversations. And again, I was in this 4-year course that, taught me all the ways to defend the faith. And, I felt very secure in my faith. And so we would debate a lot because I also have those Italian genes and all of that. And, just over time, it's been such a long time, but so I don't remember all the specifics, but just through, having these conversations and just being challenged so much and so often regarding my faith versus like always being told that it was right by the community I was in, without, which is what I was so used to. With it being challenged like that, it really began to fall apart. And I wrestled with it for 2 years. I wanted to stay Christian because, in my mind, that was how I would have the best life I could have, here on earth. I even got to a point where I was like, I just really don't know, but I'm going to choose to believe. Like, I don't just have this free, light faith, but I want this. And faith isn't about having all the answers. So I'm going to choose this. But eventually I got to a point where I stopped fighting it. I just accepted, like, I don't believe this anymore. And I can't keep forcing it. It was a very hard transition for me because, again, this was my whole community, this was my whole
Mhm.
culture. I'd
Mhm.
already signed up to go to a very strict Christian university. So that's where I was headed. But I knew I couldn't force it anymore. And so, I say I let the door close. I didn't even close it. I just stopped fighting it. And it was tough for a while, which is also why I'm passionate about this
Yeah,
coaching work.
I can
But
imagine. Is it okay if I just interrupt you here for a second? Because I'm listening and I'm absorbing like the world. And thank you for describing it so well, because it really sounds like you were in a world of Christianity and this community and these practices and these belief systems. And it sounds like the thing that is so, I mean, just like it sounds like life disruptive, like identity disruptive, life disruptive, like just fully your world shifts upside down. And it's not just your world in terms of like the inner thoughts and beliefs you had, but your external world now has to like completely shift because it was completely wrapped into this way of thinking and believing. I can't even imagine how devastating that can be. I mean, maybe while you were going through it, and for whoever's listening that can relate to it, I have some family members that were in a I don't even know how to describe it. This is where I'm not great when it comes to religion, what you're supposed to call the different things. But I think they were Christian and they were in a very conservative form of Christianity and very tight community, lots of rules. And I hadn't quite understood until I kind of witnessed their experience how when you're in these communities, in these worlds, I'll call it, um, the second like it's like when that domino effect starts to happen that you described, it's like everything just starts to reshift and like you lose community, you lose loved ones, like people that become family. And these communities are so entrenched and supportive of each other in such a beautiful way. And you risk losing all of that when you even consider questioning or walking away from the belief system that everyone has I don't want to say subscribe to because I feel like that's such an ugly way of saying it, but just like that everyone believes in and has agreed with and chooses to continue believing in, you know?
No, that's absolutely accurate. And the only thing I would say about that
Yeah.
is that, for me, it's interesting because that is typically the outcome, what you
Hmm.
described. And
Hmm.
internally, that was the outcome for me.
Hmm.
But externally, you know, it's because the 2 years that I was wrestling with it, I was still in high school. I didn't tell anyone that I was doubting or that I was struggling with this because it felt so threatening because I didn't
Hmm.
want to be the outsider and I
Hmm.
wanted to believe. So I was trying to push these doubts away.
Hmm.
So I really just kind of I didn't ignore it, but I didn't share it with anyone. So it didn't create any external differences. It was all internal. And then by the time I did just accept, like, I don't believe this anymore, I can't live like this anymore, um, I was, planning to go to that Christian university, and I didn't change that again because I didn't want to tell my mom. I didn't feel safe to tell her yet. Not that she would do anything. She's very loving and supportive. I just didn't want to put her through that disappointment and
Yeah.
fear and different things like that.
Yeah.
Um,
And we
and
project our own fears in these situations. So, that, and you're 17 years old, like,
yeah.
yeah.
So, and another thing is she said if I go to this particular school, she would, support me in doing that. And so I kept the plan to go to this school that was more of a boarding school than a college because it was just, so strict with all its rules and all of that.
Hmm.
So again, I continue to be in that environment, chapel every semester, chapel every day, Bible every semester, all these different things. But eventually I did find community. So I was already going through this shift of like from
Hmm.
my homeschool Christian community to going to college.
Hmm.
And, I was pretty, lucky. I don't even know if I'd use the word lucky anymore, but, it worked out well
Yeah.
because I was able to connect with people who weren't the fundamentalist type. Like that's the word that I use for kind of what you
Yeah.
were saying earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and actually, interestingly enough, the first person I actually told that I wasn't Christian was a woman or a girl at the time who was in school to be a minister, which within the Church of Christ, which is the sect that I grew up in and the type of college it was, you could only be like a children or youth minister. But regardless, she was very into it all. But I don't know how it all worked out, but I felt to tell her, and I told her, and she was the first person I told. And I remember her saying like that I seemed more Christian than most Christians that she knew, and I was like, well, I am, fresh out of it, and I was still in that mindset that
Yeah.
this is how you live to have, the best life. And plus, again, I was so young and I was right out of all of that conditioning to be like a meek woman and, just sweet and submissive and all these different
Yeah.
and pure and all of
Yeah.
that. So,
Of course, of course. I mean, I think, yeah, thank you for sharing all that. I feel like even if someone hasn't been through growing up in a more fundamentalist or like strict society or community, so many people can relate to that, right? Like a lot of what I like to talk about on this podcast and with my community is the fact that a lot of us as women are kind of indoctrined and conditioned to be small and submissive and nice and kind. And I mean, that's part of like why I call my community like the bold and brave truth tellers, because it's like out of that conditioning. Like it's good. It served a really strong purpose of survival.
mm,
And sometimes it's still very useful, like being service based and catering to loved ones. But it's really about becoming versatile in how we show up in our lives and being able to be authentic about how we show up rather than just doing it because it's what we have to do.
mm,
And I find that when you add a religious, I kind of shared with you before we hopped on the podcast that I don't come from a very religious nuclear family, but I come from a religious extended family, especially on my mom's side. And my grandparents, especially my grandmother, was very religious, and some of my aunts and uncles are more religious than I am. And there was even if I wasn't in my family, I still felt it, like in the culture. So I come from Dominican Republic, and so in Dominican, I mean, in Italy too, obviously, that's where Roman
mm,
Catholicism and everything was created, so it's enmeshed in the culture. But even in the DR, it's like there's a lot of it's what I'm trying to say is that it's very challenging when the conditioning around of how we are supposed to be as women is very much tied to not only our well-being and survival in the world and in relationships with other people, but also in the afterlife.
mm,
Because like the scariest thing to humans is death, right?
mm,
And so if you're going to tie and here you can probably hear the passion or slight anger in my voice as I say this, but it's like if you're going to tie the thing that I'm most scared of with how I should behave, yeah, I'm going to get in line.
mhm,
Like I'm going to submit, I'm going to get in line and I'm going to behave. And I've
mhm,
had certain situations in my life where when I didn't behave the way that a woman should, the more conservative religious people in my surrounding got pretty freaking angry and like consequences were implemented and like the girl who did what was not supposed to do must now be shunned and must now leave the community because it's no longer okay.
Mhm.
And it's challenge. I can only imagine for the people that you work with, for the experiences that you had. But it's challenging when that gets tied into like the existence of life, because then how do you sort through all those thoughts and feelings by yourself? Like even the story that you told, the way in which you described kind of keeping it all to yourself out of fear that you would disappoint, or, maybe other people have fears of like losing their community or being kicked out of their home or things like that. Like sometimes it's just a fear, sometimes it's just a projection, sometimes it's a reality though.
Yeah.
These are kind of all my thoughts just as I was listening to you.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why, I I've chosen to come out about it. I mean, for
Hmm.
so there was the 2 years of just kind of the term that I've seen a lot is deconstruction, to kind of
Hmm.
like your faith starts to kind of be pulled apart and looked at a little more closely. And,
Hmm.
some people reconstruct it in a different way. Some people, lose their religion altogether. Some people lose spirituality altogether. My
Hmm.
experience was I I did close the door to spirituality. The religion one closed on its own, but with spirituality, I was like, not doing that again. I was like, I do not want to be wrong. I don't want to be hurt. I do not want to be confused. I feel like, because, I felt so much security within Christianity because
Yeah.
not only did I have all of these people telling me I was right and so good and correct and all these different things, but I had, the Bible. And in my circle, it was very stressed that the Bible is the word of God. So I'm like,
Hmm.
well, great, like easy, which is
I'm
not,
good. Yeah,
but
you're like, I'm good. I'm
like,
doing it all correct. A plus, like,
well, and
yeah.
I have reason to believe I'm on the right track because I can
Yeah.
reference it in this
Oh,
book.
right. You have all those external people confirming the fact that you're on the right track. So it's not just you thinking, it's not
Mhm.
just like an ego thing of like, oh, I think I'm right and I know I'm right because I say so. It's like I have all these people telling me that I'm
Yeah,
right.
so many people, and then
Right.
again, the word of God, according to
Right.
that
No, the
station.
biggest, right, like the biggest stamp of approval,
Exactly.
yes, of course.
Which, to be honest, was actually part of my struggle as in those last 2 years because I, you know, I mean, everyone in my circle was like saying, this is the word of God and we need to follow it and do what he wants and all this stuff. But the deeper I would dig into it, because I would do my own research, I would read the Bible every day and all these different things. There were certain things that the Bible would talk about that people weren't doing. And so then that would create, this conflict. Like, are we not doing enough? Like, wait, if this is what we're serious about, like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
So there were challenges in that too, but without letting myself go there, there was all this confirmation again from my whole circle, as well as believing I had this book. So when I didn't believe that this book was the word of God anymore, and that this religion is the right way, the only way, and all this stuff,
Mhm.
I felt like, well, how am I supposed to figure out spirituality? There's nothing to tell me one thing is right over another. So I'm not going to bother. I'm just going
Mhm.
to focus on living my life. And I was very stubborn because, one thing that I loved about Christianity was, again, this belief and teaching that this is how you have the most peaceful life, the most happy life, the life with the most love, and all these things. And I just felt like that was a huge piece of grief for me, and losing that um, feeling of security of having those
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
from a relationship with God and Jesus. And again, just feeling secure within all of those affirmations from the community and the books
Hmm.
and Bible and all of that.
Hmm.
But I still wanted that. And I said, I'm going to make that happen for me. And so, I did my best with that. And that's what led me again to pursue therapy, if it's not spirituality, to bring these feelings of love and healing. It can be through science and research,
Yeah.
social work and therapy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that path began at that point.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'm curious about one thing that just kind of like sparked as I was listening to you, and I wonder if the people that you've helped through this process experience this. And I'm just gonna kind of lay it out for you what my thoughts, and maybe we can work through it together. But I'm thinking that if I am growing up in this community where I'm being told, like, you're right, you're good, you're doing everything correctly, whatnot, and then I start to realize, let's say, that like there's a discrepancy between what's being said we're supposed to do and maybe what's being done, or hypocrisies that I witness, or things like that. And then I start to question that. And then I would imagine that for some people, I also start to like question myself for believing all these other people as my belief in them breaks. And then my ability to trust other people breaks. And then my ability to trust myself breaks. Is that a common experience that you see in the people that, or even in yourself and the people that you have worked with?
Oh yes, it's so common, and I mean I definitely experienced that. I did not trust myself and I did not trust other people. And I see this a lot with people who are deconstructing. You lose that trust, I mean it's so hard, especially for people who this has been their lives for
Yeah,
30, 40 years, and I
yeah,
mean people are coming out of it and thinking like, how did I believe that? How did I, some say like fall for that for
yeah.
so long? And it does create this distrust. And again, this is why I see a lot of people, including myself for 10 years, just
Hmm.
kind of shut down to spirituality. Now, I did not call myself an atheist because that's another version of certainty. You can be certain that, your religion is right and your God is right, but atheism is a level of certainty that there
True.
is no God for sure. There is no supernatural. There's only the material.
Yeah.
And so I stayed, it's funny because I wasn't open. I wouldn't go there. I
Yeah,
I called myself an agnostic. I related to that term that I just don't know, but I left it at that and I wanted to leave it at that. Like, yeah, I don't know, but I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to explore it. I don't want you to tell me anything about it either because I just don't want to go there.
yeah.
Um, and that was my experience for a long time, and which again is why I'm passionate about this, because I want to help people who would rather live differently. Because the truth is, that's why it was so hard for me, because I loved spirituality so much and I just didn't see a way to it without the security of everything I was used to giving me security about my spirituality at the time with religion. And I see so many people just lose it all because of that. But there is a way to have your own spirituality, rebuild that trust, heal that trust, that you may have struggled with through that grieving process, deconstruction process. And it really does greatly improve our quality of life. And there's hard research behind that.
There is. That's good to hear. I have not looked into that research yet, but I'm sure you have.
Yes, yes, there's
Yeah.
great research behind the
Oh.
impacts of spirituality, and they even distinguish in the research that spirituality does not mean being religious. Now, there
Hmm.
are religious people who are spiritual, but there are also religious people who are not spiritual. Spirituality is its own thing, and you can have it with or without religion. And spirituality does improve our quality of life. There is I can't remember the numbers, but there is a drastic decrease in suicide for those who have strong sense of spirituality.
Hmm.
Um, your literal prefrontal cortex is thicker. There's cortical thickening for those who are spiritual that we see in actual brain scans, and so
For
there's lower
us,
risk of depression.
okay, that's what I was going to ask. For us lay people, English basic speakers, what are the
Yeah, so
benefits of a thicker prefrontal cortex?
less rates of depression and less risk of depression. So
Wow.
there is just improved quality of life that is just clear, not just in polls. There's been polls, and it's not just like, let's ask these people and see what they say. And, I've heard some critiques to that. Well, you know, especially from deconstructed Christians, they might say, if they're kind of hurt and bitter, which I don't blame them,
Yeah.
they've said things like, well, Christians are kind of programmed to be happy all the time. Even if they're not actually happy, they can't show it, in some circles. And
Mhm.
so some people think the polls may be skewed because of that. But these are polls over generations, not just, a set of people. And then again, we also have the brain scans that show it. And again, it's not only for Christians or people of certain religions, it's across
Yeah.
religion, even without religion. It's about the spirituality factor and the value of that.
Mm. Yeah, that's super interesting. I'm so happy to hear that there's like research around this. I wish I enjoyed reading research more. I just really detest it. I did as much as I had to for grad school, and then I was like done closing that chapter of my life. But it's useful, right? It's useful to hear that these things are helpful at a greater scale. I know as a personal testimony, I can say that spirituality has massively changed my life, my mental health, my anxiety. I did
Mhm.
so much therapy, love therapy, all the things. And I feel like the thing that's really created like a much bigger shift, a much more significant shift has been surrendering to spirituality.
Yeah, it's I agree, and which is another reason why I wanted to take this approach with coaching, because I
Mhm.
mean, you can, use some spirituality within therapy if there's like an agreement to it and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But but again, in my personal life as well as, seeing it in others and seeing it through the research, there's so much benefit and power that can come from
Yeah.
strengthening or
Mhm.
even developing one's
Mhm.
spirituality that can lead to so much benefit in mental health and quality of life that I want to be able to support people in that.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So walk us through, not to like simplify the whole process because I know it's a lot more complex, but walk us through like what does it look like to, I guess, go through that, how to heal from that deconstruction process and then create even just like the trust in ourselves, the trust in others, trust in something greater than us. What does that look like?
Mm. It took me so long because I didn't know how to do it or what I was doing or any of that. But now that I
Yeah.
figured it out, that's again why I want to help people. And what I've noticed is that, I mean, a lot of it is tied to healing, the things you need to do to heal, period, from, any kind of emotional wound. There
Hmm.
is the acceptance of the pain and allowing ourselves to feel that and process that. I like to emphasize that if we feel to heal, we are feeling. That means we're not thinking. So we
Hmm.
don't want to be getting lost in thoughts about the bad things that happen to us or how it might impact our future or anything along those lines. Yeah, the brain's going to think. So let's think about what's happening in the body and allow ourselves to process that. So there's the feeling piece. Honestly, for me, the trust came from spirituality, from kind of finding my way back to spirituality. And I think what helped me get there was actually my own work with a coach that I hired at one point because I was just so lost and struggling so much
Hmm.
that I wanted some external help. And she really helped me to learn to reconnect to myself, learn that or like recognize how I was abandoning myself in so many ways by being such a people pleaser
Hmm.
and focusing on others' emotions before my own.
Hmm.
And that just kind of started the path back to spirituality without me even recognizing it,
Hmm.
which is really cool to think about because, my view of spirituality now is that we are connecting to not some external spiritual force that is, judgmental and, can't stand us if we do the wrong things and sin and all
Yeah.
these different things,
Yeah.
but it's something within us. And so returning to, source, one might say, by returning within and focusing on ourselves and loving ourselves and listening to ourselves and learning to identify intuition and connect with that and nourish that, that's been huge in the healing process and the trusting process.
I can imagine. I can imagine. You've clearly done a lot of work on yourself and on understanding this. I just in so many different ways I relate a lot to a lot of the things that you shared. And I think what if I could add to anyone going through this is allowing yourself to like just give yourself the time to get there, not forcing it on yourself. There's especially when it comes to something so private in a sense. Like, I
Mhm.
think of spirituality as something very, very private, as much as we can talk about it openly and everything, but like that connection that you have is so intimate. But sorry,
Very personal.
very personal, very intimate. And so I think of it as like it's such a private, personal, intimate space of you that it's important to. I like how you were saying earlier, how you were like, I'm agnostic, but like I'm not gonna go there with people. Like I'm not. It sounds like you weren't like ready to go there with people, and it's like, yeah, we need to create those boundaries around that internal relationship that we have, so that we can decide what kind of internal relationship we want to have, not having the relationship that other people think that we should have with whatever it is that we want to define as spirituality. Like I was chatting with a client today about introducing some of these things to her, and I was like, listen, call it cosmic energy, call it universe, call it galaxies, call it God, call it anything you want. Like call it what you want, because at the end of the day, it's your relationship with what you feel in that moment that you're connecting to it.
Mhm.
And you can assign whatever name you want to assign to it. And I think that's where the freedom lies in spirituality, is that you get to choose that relationship rather than having to follow a specific set of rules around the gender you're supposed to give that entity, or the image you're supposed to give that entity, or what you're supposed to do so that that entity doesn't then like punish you and send you to like hell. Because especially for you and I coming from Italy. I don't know how this plays into Christianity. I haven't done my research, but growing up with like La Divina Commedia, the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri, if anyone looks into it, it's like literally the seven circles of hell, and you grew up like thinking about that and learning about that. It's like, well, I don't want to go there, you know? But again, like that's all images and symbols that I've just been like we've been indoctrinated with and have been like put into our very intimate private space. And so setting some boundaries with that, I love that you gave yourself the time and the space to revisit that in a way that was according to, there was a lot of agency in the way in which you went about that. And I think that's really important for people going through this process.
Mhm. I definitely agree. I mean, we have to set our boundaries. We have to take our time. We're all on our own different paths. The one thing I encourage those on this journey who are open to, listening to me about it is,
Yeah.
recognize that it creates harm when we hold on to fear or we hold on to anger, and not for anyone other than ourselves. Is
Hmm.
it healthy for us to allow ourselves to process those feelings in a way that allows us to release them versus continuously fuel them? Because that's sometimes what I see in they see construction communities is people who are just so angry, and they don't even feel open to other people having their unique spiritual lives and journeys. They shut them down because they have this new perspective of anything spiritual is just like a crutch and a handicap, and you know that's just you tricking yourself, and all these kinds of things that aren't, I don't
Interesting.
believe, true at all. uh,
Yeah.
so there is value in being intentional, is what I like
Hmm.
to say. Being intentional about taking care of your emotions through this process. But as far as how it looks on the other end of that, whether it looks like returning to spirituality or finding your own spirituality, or even, some people have like a mystic Christianity, or even if it is religion, whatever it is,
Yeah. Yeah.
as
Yeah.
long as it's authentic to you and done in your time versus, again,
Hmm.
like you said, being pushed by anyone or anything of that nature, because it's all about returning to yourself and
Hmm.
being led by yourself in that intuition.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And just like the amount of love that you're able to access when you connect to yourself and you connect back home. And I like it because therapy only goes so far. Now I'm gonna nerd out on therapy, but I just have to because here we are, two therapists sitting in a in a conversation. But like I find that therapy is really amazing, but it has a bit of a limit in that it's like, okay, I don't know, take I think it was like acceptance and commitment therapy or something like that. The idea that like there's a part of you, or is it internal family systems? I don't know, but I haven't studied this recently. But there's like I think it was IFS. It was like there's that self that's like wiser than all the parts or something.
Yes, mhm.
Yeah, okay, thank you. It's IFS. And so that was really powerful. I was like, ooh, that's really cool. But then I feel like when you add spirituality to it, it takes it to another level where it's not just me.
Mhm.
It's interesting because it's not just me being a higher self that can look at these parts, but it's also like I'm connected to this collective of people. It makes me, in a way, because I don't want to make it sound like I'm superior by looking at these parts, but because in a way I actually feel more humbled when I connect to spirituality. I'm like, okay, I am just a human connected to all these other humans. I'm able to recognize my humanity and other people's humanity more. And I'm able to, like you said, connect to all the beautiful parts of what I consider to be spirituality, which is like being in service of other people and having a greater mission and why was I put on this earth and what am I here to do and what are my talents and how am I able to use those to help other people. And I mean, this podcast was born out of asking myself those questions, but just kind of I don't know what I'm trying to say, but yeah, that. Yeah.
Yeah, IFS was actually a big piece for me to return to
Mhm.
Earth, but I think I may have briefly mentioned that.
Yeah, yeah.
Because, that whole idea of self energy, it reminded me a lot of what I was taught to be the Holy Spirit growing up in Christianity.
Mhm.
And just kind of seeing those similarities. And it's not like it was new to me to see similarities from Christianity and other religions and different things like that. But I came to a point where I was more open to it. And so it did kind of fuel more self exploration, even external, like learning things and all of that. But I agree that, you know, when we are able to connect to the self or recognize that we have that self energy, yet also have these parts,
Mhm.
there is a beauty in being humbled by that versus some people reject the physical and the material and they focus so much on the spiritual that they don't care about what's going on in the world at all or
Mhm.
don't take care of their relationships and different things
Mhm.
like this.
That's true. Yeah.
But what I've seen and what's resonated with me is this idea that the most spiritual thing that one can do is be a human on earth or be in a human body on earth, for several
Yeah.
decades.
Yeah.
And respecting that process and experiencing this journey as a human here on earth in this lifetime is spiritual. And we can enhance this experience as a human, if or when we can tap into the kind of extra or like the less clear happenings of spirituality behind the scenes, so to speak.
Yeah, 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 that clicks with me. Yeah, that's a good way to put it because it's so abstract. It's hard to kind of put
Mhm.
words to it, but I feel like that's a good way to phrase it.
Mhm.
Yeah. This is wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm curious, what are some like last words of wisdom or advice? Like what if, what do you want people to take from this conversation?
What I would want people to take from this conversation is just the research for starters that you know spirituality can improve your life so much if it's
Mhm.
something that's on the back burner or non-existent in your life. At the same time, pursue it if you feel open to that in a way that is authentic to you, always prioritizing yourself and leaning into your intuition and doing your healing work. I mean, we don't always have to be healing, but if you feel anger or fear or resentment, those are parts, in IFS language, internal
Yeah.
systems. And so, working with those sides of you to
Hmm.
allow yourself the opportunity to pursue this, and sometimes we need external help, and there are therapists for that, there are coaches for that, there are many great resources of different books that can be supportive. But the reason I'm doing all of this is because I want that for more people, because I truly believe that the more of us that are spiritual, the better world that we will live in as a result, because there is, just like you talked about, there is a calm in the nervous system that comes from spirituality, unlike other things, and that
Yeah.
surrender. And with that, we have so much more energy for love and generosity, and so much less fear of our neighbor. So I would encourage people to follow their heart and consider spirituality and consider help if they feel they might need that.
Mm, that's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing all that. Thank you for being here. I'm gonna put all your links in the show notes, but generally, where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm all over the place. I'm Michela Giordano Castro on Facebook. On all of the socials, I am Michela's Mind Munchies. It started off even before my spirituality reawakening with just wanting to share, the things I would think about, hoping that they would benefit other people and improving their lives. And now a lot of that is sharing things about spirituality. But yeah, it's Michela's Mind Munchies. I'm on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and you can find me there.
Oh, you are everywhere. You're in more places than I am. I love it. Thank you so much for being here and thank you for sharing mostly also just your personal experience, right? I feel like I love hearing people's stories. That's what I relate to a lot more. I had prepared a whole series of questions and I was like, that's way too intellectual. Let's have a real conversation about life and what we go through. And I think that is a lot more relatable. So thank you for opening up to us today. And for anyone listening, if you like what you heard, we drop episodes every Thursday. Please like, follow, and subscribe. It helps us grow the podcast and share this message with other people. So I will see you next week. Thank you for being here.